Hey everybody, happy 4th of July. As I speak, this is the 4th of July 2026, and I would just like to make a little video expressing my appreciation for this great nation of the United States of America, and also some of my thoughts on this year where people are saying, oh, they're not proud of being American, they can't celebrate the 4th of July this year. It doesn't seem like there's anything to celebrate. I wanted to comment a little bit on that attitude, which is surprisingly prevalent. Maybe that was kind of a marginal view 30 years ago or something. You might have heard it in some graduate university department or something. But it wasn't mainstream, but it's become more mainstream, unfortunately. And I'd like to say a little bit about my thoughts about America and the 4th of July in general. Before we start, let me just... I got a couple things I'd like to show you. First of all, if you've ever watched this channel, you'll see I've got several of these books. This is like a 12-volume set of the Golden Book History of the United States. And I like to use these sometimes. There's a bunch of great art in here by an artist named Alton S. Tobey. He was either a Harvard or Yale person, so... but he did all the paintings, and all these paintings are super good. I'm surprised they're not more famous. I think maybe because they're kind of old red meat American history, they maybe have fallen out of favor, but they're a bunch of great original oil paintings that he did for this series. And I've got the entire set of encyclopedia, and so that's volume 4. But... and there's also a bunch of great drawings in here by a guy named Richard Kluge. And let me just, a couple things I'll notice right off the bat. First of all, these are, I'll just set these down here. They're quite patriotic, and that's good. So these were first released in 1959. This is volume 5, and I have these. So these are books I've had since I was a kid. There's even a picture of me somewhere with the World War II one. But you would get these. I think I've even got an ad. I was rifling through here. Yeah, right here. That's the old ad. 49 cents for volume 1. Boy, there's been some inflation since then. 99 cents each for volumes 1 and 2. And the way it worked, I was little, because I remember that picture of me with holding one of these books. I was in 2nd grade. But my mom and dad bought me these, and you got one a month. And you know what? They wonder why kids don't read history. This had a bunch of great history in them. This is volume 4, Winning of the West, or Building the Nation. So that'd be like the early national period, from like the Constitution through right on up to the eve of the Civil War, the early 1800s. But one of the great things about this is it was old schoolboy history, as I like to call it. You know, my grandma taught 4th grade history for decades. She was a great lady. She's been dead a long time, my dad's mom. But she would always say, well, you know, history is a good subject for a boy, and I always thought English was a good subject for a girl. She was born, way at the turn of the last century, so that's how she thought. I'm not saying that we should think that, but to the extent there was ever a degree of truth in that, you definitely got a sense of that. Here, look, you get these. This was good old boy history with a lot of war. Is that good? Get a lot of war. Look, here guys get blown away, right? All look, it's the point of death right there. I was just thinking about YouTube. You can't even say the word KILL on YouTube. Your videos get prejudiced. So people, you come up with like these Orwellian newspeak terms like unalived. You can't even you watch old 70s shows. But look, this is volume 6, The Winning of the West. And there's one picture in here I always remember. Let's see if I can find it. It's kind of funny. Yeah, right here. Look, and this is a drawing by a guy named Richard Kluge, two cowboys. Like this is, you know what? And yeah, I would say, you know, I read this in second and third grade, and I bet it's a higher reading level than a second or third grade book today. But boy, it sure had some good pictures. Like when you're third grade, you look at that, it's like, oh man, that cowboy's just getting it right there. I'm not saying that's good, but when's the last time we can't even show westerns on TV anymore? You know, how often does Hollywood make westerns now? Sometimes they make some good ones, but not very often. And when they do, there's usually some kind of post-modern, post something or another view that's in there, some kind of hedging your bets. But this was old red meat westerns, you know, and that's history. I mean, it goes right through the, you know. It says, killings were common in the lawless cow towns of the Old West. That's true. You get that great picture. And that's so, look at this one, volume 5, the Civil War. Union and Confederate soldiers, just like hand-to-hand combat right there on the cover. You know, right away I could see if you signed this today, it would be like, all the girls would say, oh, it's just a bunch of boys, you know, and I don't know. So I'm not saying that's even entirely inaccurate or maybe. But look, I know when I was a boy, kind of a red-blooded American boy, and I used to think that was the greatest cover ever. Like when I was like 8 or 9, 10. Oh man, it was like Leave It to Beaver and Larry Mondello. You know, oh man, look, you know, look at that, hand to hand. Who's gonna win that one? But yeah, and then you open it up, and you got to, you know, let's see here. And you get generals from both sides. You don't see that anymore. You know, you definitely, you know, there's Stonewall Jackson. See, you know what? The Civil War was American versus American. If you don't think the Confederacy was part of America, then stop calling it the Civil War, because the Civil War means it was American versus American, and the South was part of America. Last time I checked. There's Ulysses S. Grant. Great man. Somebody said he drank all the time. President Lincoln said, well, send him some more. He was winning. They had McClellan, some of those other generals in there. They'd always, you know, want more. They needed more. And Ulysses S. Grant he'd get his ass kicked by Robert E. Lee one day. And he'd wake up and attack again, you know. He figured, hey, we've got more men, more industry in the North. We're just going to, and you know what? It was an effective strategy. But he took some heavy casualties when he first came on. But look, you get these pictures, just like guys getting, look at this, the Confederate Army, let's just like guys getting blown away right there. Look, pretty. Yeah, somebody today would be sure to say, oh, that's inappropriate, or it's encouraging violence, or it's a. When I was in graduate school, the feminists would always call it drums and trumpets history. It's stars and bars and banners. And look, there's Robert E. Lee. There's Abraham Lincoln. That's Alton S. Tobey. What a fine artist. I'm surprised these paintings aren't more well known. I'm telling you, I think it's because they were in these books, and these books were kind of retired from. I wouldn't even be surprised if they're not even in libraries anymore, because, and they're, you know, they're not racist or anything like that. But some people might say they were racist by default or something like that, because it was mostly, you know, white men in the national history of the United States. But you know. It went through, there's a lot of detail in here. I bet there's a lot more detail about U.S. history than what a lot of kids get today, if they get any at all. But just excellent books. In the front, you had every volume had, that's John F. Kennedy. And this was published, I think it came out in 59, but right when he was made president. So this was early Kennedy. He hadn't been shot yet. I've got the entire set up there, but I don't think he was shot by the time they did the last volume. So this was pre, you know, but I think it came out when he was president. So it's like a Camelot era book. There's Dwight D. Eisenhower. Look, you got a Democrat and a Republican. They're both you know what? When I was a kid, I just remember looking at that and thinking, those are both good men. Those are both my presidents, you know. I didn't think too much of it. Then you got Harry Truman. And you know who else you have there? Herbert Hoover. And you know what? He has a thoughtful comment there. He was a Christian man. He was a decent man. I think the Democrats ran against Herbert Hoover all through the 30s and 40s. Really, in some ways, up to the 70s, they would always run against Herbert Hoover because he led America into the Depression. And I don't know, when you look at this, you suddenly think maybe he wasn't, you know, politics ruins people. You know, Herbert Hoover was probably a decent man. You know, maybe, I don't know, whatever you think of his policies, but there's Harry Truman. Read Harry Truman. My debt to history is one which cannot be calculated. That's Harry Truman. I know of no other motivation which so accounts for my awakening of interest as a young lad in the principles of leadership and government. And you know what? This isn't social history. I think social history's had a big influence, well, since the 70s, but certainly since the 90s. You know, it's almost taken over. But he's talking about leadership and government. That would be like the President of the United States, great generals like Robert E. Lee, like Ulysses S. Grant, like, Winfield Scott or whoever. Eisenhower, leadership. And you know what? At least one of our parties don't have leaders. You might not like the leader of another party that's currently in power, but at least they have a leader. Look, leadership. Yeah, these are good books for future leaders. My debt to history is one which cannot be calculated. I know of no other motivation which so accounts for my awakening interest as a young lad in the principles of leadership and government. I know that the one great external influence which more than anything else nourished and sustained that interest in government and public service was the endless reading of history, which I began as a boy and which I have kept up ever since. That was good old Harry Truman. Remember Chicago 8, America Needs You, Harry Truman here? Harry Truman was the last president we had that didn't go to college. Can you imagine what they do with? Although, you know what? I think college degrees are becoming less important in some ways in American politics than they were maybe, you know, there was almost an obsession with them for a while. Although, you know, it's kind of ironic. A lot of these DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, like Mamdani and some of these socialist candidates that are running, they all have kind of fancy private college degrees. A lot of them come from quite affluent backgrounds, which if you've ever been around some of these expensive private colleges, as I have for many years, you see that these are often people that come from an immigrant background, come here in these private schools, and have their heads full of a lot of progressive ideas, but they've also, in a lot of cases, barely set foot in a public school. And in a lot, I don't know if that's true in every case, but in a lot of cases that's true. They barely set foot in public schools. So, but there's a good old Harry Truman. Didn't have a college education. Played the piano. Was his best Truman. And didn't he threaten to punch a guy because the guy made fun of his daughter playing the piano or something like that? I forget. I hope you can correct me. But anyway, those are great books. And you definitely should check out The Art of Alton S. Tobey. I got a couple other old vintage things. This is an old vinyl album I have by Walt Disney. It's old Walt Disney, good Walt Disney, not like today. National anthems and their stories. And I think this was back when you get a lot of records that were still kind of like old radio shows. You know, and I used to listen to these a lot, and you'd listen to them, you know, there'd be a narrator, kind of one of those big old radio-sounding narrators. And there's I think the national anthem, Italy, France, La Marseillaise, Greece, Never Shall I Fail to Know Thee, Greece, the Netherlands, Australia. And you get a little blurb, you know, you get maybe a little 5-minute story of all the national anthems. And then there's old Canada. See? And then, of course, the big last one is the national anthem, Francis Scott Key. And, you know, there are people that don't like the national anthem. They won't stand for the national anthem. Sometimes they'll say we should change the national anthem. But then if you talk to them more, they really don't actually believe in a national anthem. Let me tell you something. If you can't stand up for the national anthem, and leave the arena. That's the way I look at it. But anyway, this was pretty good. This was a good old Disney. But such good books.